News headlines would have you believe that the minute you cross into Mexico, cartel members are going to kidnap you for ransom and that police officers are going to take a bribe from you the moment you get there. The reports of violence in Mexico are not unfounded, but are often focused in certain areas of a very large and very diverse country. More often than not, travelers are not directly targeted by cartel violence unless they're somehow involved or a bystander. Today, we will talk through the U.S. State Department's travel advisories for Mexico, what are some of the safer destinations to visit, what to know about the cartels and corruption issues in country, and any tips to stay safe while you travel to Mexico. My name is Evan, and I have advised hundreds of travelers of their safety for trips they have taken to some of the toughest environments all around the world. I've also spent time in Mexico and had some of the best food and experiences of my entire personal travels there. So I can't wait to talk to you about Mexico and staying safe there. If you like what you see, please check out my other videos, like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. To start, we're going to talk about the U.S. State Department Travel Advisory for Mexico. So in a previous video, we spoke about U.S. travel advisories in general, what you should think about the State Department travel advisories, and sort of how to navigate the website on the State Department page. For Mexico, it's a little bit different though. So as we discussed previously, oftentimes they'll have some kind of rating for each different country around the globe, and it goes on a 1 through 4 scale. For Mexico, they rate each individual Mexican state on that same 1 through 4 scale, and each one has a separate rating. So I think it's really helpful in terms of knowing where to go within Mexico and getting a really baseline understanding of what might be safer versus not so safe areas within the country. So the list provides a basic overview of potential risks and how the State Department views each specific area. And then as you can see, there's a wide range of different ratings across the country. So I'll show you just on the screen, but basically they have a map available to you that you can see where each different state is, what the risk ratings are, and it would also provide you some specific advice about what they allow U.S. State Department employees to do within that particular area, if they allow them to do road travel, if they can only do air travel, things like that will give you a basic understanding. As with all State Department ratings, I would just take it with a little bit of a grain of salt in terms of a lot of State Department advisories tend to be really risk averse, and State Department employees are required to be very risk averse in their jobs as well. So definitely take a look at that, take a look through the map, see the different areas, see areas that you think you're going to, and that will give you a very good baseline of what you're looking at. So the first thing we're going to jump into is destinations that are both popular and also safe in Mexico. So like anywhere, no matter where you are, whether you're in your home country, in your home city, you want to use just basic precautions when you're going out about your day-to-day life. And that follows true even if you're on vacation. So same goes for any of these locations I'm going to mention now. The safest area of the country really is the Yucatan Peninsula. So it comprises 3 different states, Campeche, Yucatan, and then Quintana Roo. So all 3 of those have some of the most popular tourist destinations that you've probably heard of before. Places like Cancun, Tulum, Playa del Carmen, Cozumel, which is a popular cruise ship destination. Most areas in the Yucatan are safe, and travelers find it relatively easy to move around, especially because there are so many resorts, so many travelers going there. So it's a pretty safe bet if you have no international travel experience and you want a relatively easy and safe place to go within Mexico. Mexico City, I would say, like any large city, does present the risk of crime. So again, use those standard precautions you would use when you're out and about. But in sort of the more popular areas of Mexico City, it's very safe for international travelers. Definitely recommend going there. It's a very foodie city, lots of interesting cultural things that you'll find. So, use your common sense, but at the same time, it's definitely a destination that you should look into. In terms of Baja California, so if you're on the west coast of the United States and you plan to travel somewhere within Mexico, it might be to that particular part of the country. There are 2 different states there. So there's Baja California, which is the top state within that, so the northern portion of Baja. and then Baja California Sud, which is the southern portion. So there are some higher levels of crime in the northern portion, Baja California, but Baja California Sud does remain, a safe location. You probably heard of Cabo San Lucas and other major tourist destinations down on the tip of Baja. People oftentimes will overland there too, so they might take, a van, travel across the entirety of Baja, and usually they have no issues whatsoever. So I would say that's another location that you can go if you're interested. Oaxaca State is a place I just recently went just this past year. I would highly, highly recommend Oaxaca to anybody. It is quite a large area, and so there's multiple things that you can do while you're there. Obviously, Oaxaca City is the capital. It has one of the best food scenes in Mexico. Moles, mezcal, all of that comes directly from that area. And then in addition, on the coast, there's Puerto Escondido. So that is sort of the largest city on the coast, but there's some great other towns along there too, such as Mazunte, Zipolite, Puerto Engel, and all of those different destinations for, surfers, beachgoers, yogis, anything like that. So those are all, great locations to go as well. So let's talk a little bit about cartels, corruption, and crime. Those are kind of the biggest things that people think about when they think about Mexico. A lot of that is based solely on what they see in the news cycle, especially if you're from the US like I am, right? We hear all these reports of people, running into cartel violence while they're in Mexico going on vacation, or they've done something stupid, crossed the border, made someone mad, things like that. So I would just say, Mexican cartels are very powerful. So they have very strong economic and political ties throughout Mexico, and then also internationally too. So major cartels like the Sinaloa cartel, Jalisco, New Generation cartel, Juarez cartel, all of those operate through most parts of Mexico, even in these locations that are considered, relatively safe as well. So oftentimes I'll just say that their operations do not directly involve international travelers usually, nor do they actually target international travelers outside of their traditional territories of operation. So I would say, look at that State Department map. You can see different areas where the, cartels may be more operational. But in general, if you're going to some of those major tourist destinations, some of these locations that are a little bit lower threat, most of the time you're not going to encounter any issues with the cartels whatsoever. Foreign nationals, more often than not, when they do become tied up in sort of cartel violence, it's oftentimes as just bystanders, right? Which is unfortunate and does, point to a larger issue of cartels within the country. But the other part of that would be if you have some kind of involvement in cartel issues, you're buying hard drugs off the street, things like that, that could potentially, put you in a bad situation. So I would just say, in general, for cartels, most international travelers would be completely unaffected and unaware of what's going on around them in terms of cartel operations while they vacation. In general, especially in those major cities we spoke about, the police have a significant presence there, and they have, all of the control over that particular area. In terms of corruption, so this is another thing that comes up a lot, right? In the news cycle, hearsay from people who have traveled there before. It's thought to be pretty common in Mexico, and it has been the case that politicians, have had involvement in cartels in the past, have been bribed by cartels, same thing with police, right? So in certain areas, the cartels, may have the police more solidly in their pocket. That being said, I would say most major tourist areas, the police are going to be super helpful, very responsive, especially, in those areas where, they rely on tourism for the economy. So they really want to make sure you have a good time, that you're safe. So I wouldn't worry too much in terms of that. There are some reports of police asking for bribes or potentially fining tourists for what may seem like some kind of dubious issue. So I would just say, if you plan on driving while you're there, just note that, the driving standards are considerably different. If you do run into one of those issues, oftentimes they'll request you to pay that fine right away, or it could be that they want you to go to the police station with them to pay the fine. I would recommend that you do go to the police station to pay the fine. Oftentimes that will sort of prevent any issues with bribery. And then on top of that, you can request a receipt from them while you're there. And if it does seem to be an issue on their end that they don't want to deal with that, oftentimes they'll just wave you on. So I would just say with that, you want to just be aware of what the local laws are and just make sure that you're not having run-ins with the police unless you absolutely need to. But that being said, especially in touristy areas, it's very unlikely that you're going to run into a bribe. Then the last thing I would just mention is crime, right? That's kind of the other risk of those three. So in terms of crime, we're really talking more about like robbery or petty theft. The big important thing is just to use common sense tools to make sure that you're not putting yourself in a bad situation. So make sure that you're always aware of your surroundings, you know where you're going, keep your valuables stowed, ensure that you store any valuables that are in your hotel room within the hotel room safe. But overall, you're not really likely to experience any higher rate of crime compared to some major U.S. cities or cities in Europe, for example, especially in those locations that I mentioned before. So last, we're just going to go through a few tips to stay safe in Mexico. And really these translate to other things too. So, it could be very helpful if you're going to anywhere within, Central or South America or just anywhere in general. So some of them are specific to Mexico, some of them are a little more general. Number one, this is something we talk about in every single video, right? Research where you plan to visit beforehand and just ensure that the area does not have any significant issues with violent crime, cartel violence, anything like that. So again, you just want to make sure you research before you go, understand what you're getting yourself into before you actually arrive in Mexico. Number two is learning a little Spanish to help navigate regular interactions. It's also polite, right, to know, how to say thank you, please, all those things while you're trying to order food, while you're trying to navigate, what's going on. Some of those locations will have a lot more English speakers because it's so touristy, others not so much. I found in Oaxaca, recently that in Oaxaca City, there were quite a few English speakers, but outside of it, there really were not many people who spoke English. Number three, just have a basic understanding of Mexican laws that may affect your trip and follow them. And this really relates to, if you're going to be driving, just make sure you understand what the Mexican law is, how you should be operating within, traffic, within cities, things like that. Four, make sure you understand your transportation options and just research areas you may travel through, especially if you're going overland, to ensure that, your journey is going to remain safe throughout, right? If you do rent a car, just make sure that where you're going from point A to point B, if it's a 3-4 hour drive, that you're not going to encounter, roadblocks, cartels in between. And the big thing there is just to make sure that, you're researching beforehand to see, what that route looks like. Does it pass through an area that's known to have cartels in it? One popular destination, Puerto Vallarta, is kind of surrounded by, some zone of operations for cartels. So, in those particular areas, you do want to be careful about traveling overland for long periods of time, especially if it's going to go through an area that's a little more dangerous. Number five, keep your valuables in a safe place. So we talked about this a little bit, but don't leave items unattended, right? That's just asking for trouble. Don't walk around with your electronic device out and visible all the time. If you're navigating on Google Maps, put it away periodically just to make sure that's not some super attractive target if someone's going to grab it while walking by. And then number six, this is a really important one. Local knowledge is key, right? So ask locals where to go, what to do, and how to be safe. Oftentimes, people are going to be happy to give you advice, provide you some recommendations about where to eat, provide you recommendations on what to do. All of those things are really critical to make sure that you enjoy your trip and also stay safe during your trip. So don't hesitate to ask people if you have any questions or if you want any advice. So the short answer to is Mexico safe to travel to is yes, right? So like any country you go to, you should research where is safe and where to avoid before you leave. Because there are those areas in Mexico, there are those areas in the United States, for example, there are these areas, in any country you may visit. Oftentimes, some of these areas you're going to really have levels of risk that are on par with, major cities in the US. Could be even below what those major cities would be in the US. So just a reminder, right? Mexico is a large and diverse country that I highly recommend anyone to visit, and just make sure that you research a little bit beforehand and you'll be a-okay. So thanks for watching, and I really hope that you take a chance to check out Mexico whenever you can.